everyone, welcome to this episode of ESG RoundUp, where we'll be covering COP28 and what we'll be looking forward to for the upcoming event. Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of ESG RoundUp, where we'll be discussing just an overview of COP28 and really what are our expectations for the upcoming event. So just to give an overview of what COP28 is, or even what COP is, it's the Conference of Parties by United Nations Convention on Climate Change. This is really where global leaders, governments, NGOs, business leaders all come together to really discuss climate change. What are the actions that they are taking? What are the commitments that they have already put forth? And most importantly, what's the progress against some of these commitments? So today, I'm with my colleagues here today just to discuss really, what our expectations on COP28 are. So maybe just to kick off the session, COP28, which will be happening in UAE very soon, is really, there are a couple of key areas that they're going to be focusing on. So maybe just opening up the floor to some of my colleagues here to see what are your expectations in this upcoming COP. So maybe you'll kick it off with Farhana.
Well, not really of expectation in a way, but the things that I'm really looking forward to in the new COP, coming from someone that does a lot of reporting, right? We know that the stocktake is happening, and the statistics and from the reports are not that great. We did not meet 41 out of 42 targets, and I think it's interesting to hear what are the discussions that are going to happen around it. What are the actions that the nations and organizations are going to agree on when it comes to these targets. And coming from someone with a finance background, also interesting to know that there's a high-level roundtable by the finance ministers that will also address about sustainable finance and transition financing. So it's going to be an interesting area for me in terms of that aspect, and I hope something came out of this discussion.
Okay, adding on to that, right, so as someone who deals with a lot of industry players, obviously in the infrastructure sector, which includes energy, I think apart from the roundtable, and the discussions at the conference, I think what the industry people are looking at is really how do we implement all this on the ground. So I think it's good news that there is discussion of financing mechanism. For example, in Malaysia, right, Bank Negara is finalizing the mechanism with the local banks to make sure that the funds are dispersed to energy transition related projects. So I think it will be great to hear a lot more on how do we move forward after the conference, and also after the high-level targets, how do people on the ground actually implement it?
Yep. I think similar to those, the most important one for me is a lot of the actual panel sessions. So for me, being a technology guy, being a real estate guy, the JLR panel discussion on the inactivity of the real estate really is important to me. And actually the Microsoft workshop where they talk about AI and cloud computing and how it can work with greenhouse gas emissions, I think is a very good thing. I like to see new technology, new innovation. So those workshops and panels are quite interesting.
Right, thanks for sharing your views. And I think from what I hear, what I gather from some of your, what you've shared is really operationalizing post-COP. That's really important. A lot of targets and commitments have already been set, but what are we doing? And there's clearly a gap in terms of operationalizing it and some of the targets set. So that will be quite an interesting view to see how our country is going to respond to that gap. Then I think, Richard, you also mentioned in terms of capability building, that's really important to help operationalizing. Right? So just going back on, I think, Farhana, what you mentioned on global stocktake, that's one of the key things that will be covered at COP28. And that's really one of the key milestones post-Paris Agreement, where, we are looking at the progress that have been taken by countries all over the world in terms of how they progress against the goals set in Paris Agreement. So maybe, Farhana, maybe just to double click on that a little bit, mentioned there was a gap, right? In the results shown, what do you think needs to be done to help people, be a little bit more accountable for some of these targets that have been set?
That's the thing about target, right? The targets that were set would be, it's always a top to bottom approach. So we have the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, and recently in Malaysia we only now have the NETA blueprint that actually give us a bit of an overview of how in Malaysia we are trying to achieve energy transition, right? And once we have an overview at national level of what needs to happen, only then we can start to see it being cascade down. And I think the next step is that for us to have a clear view is we now have a national target, then it's a carrot and stick situation, right? What kind of regulations that will need to come in to actually nudge our corporate players in terms of their net zero target. But I think most importantly is carrot works better. What are the policies that will need to be in place that actually entice people to actually improve and enhance on their greenhouse gas emission target.
Great. Thanks for that, Farhana. Maybe to Jasmine, I think just now you also mentioned you work a lot in the energy space. Given that there's this gap, like as mentioned, against the targets and progress made, are you hopeful that we can actually achieve the targets that we have set nationally?
Okay, so I like to think that I'm always hopeful, right? And trying to take the positive perspective. But in reality, I think ever since Farhana mentioned the National Energy Transition Roadmap, right? Mm-hmm. So we see that as a huge signal to the markets by the government, to the public sector, to the private sector, including foreign investors. So, for example, I've been getting a lot of queries from foreign investors who kind of left Malaysia earlier and kind of did not look at us for a while. But because of this roadmap, the interest has been sparked again. So definitely that's a good sign. And also, I'm personally also doing some projects looking at feasibility, regulatory assessment of carbon capture and storage, right, in Malaysia. So to me, I think the reality, maybe we're not really meeting the indicators currently, the 41 out of 42, right? And the number 42 is also up for a bit of debate. I think that we can see there is traction. What we need right now is a kind of someone to pull everything together. So the industry players are like kind of off doing things, and the foreign investors are like, okay, so there's this roadmap, so what can I do? What can I invest in? How can I really create value for myself and for Malaysia? So that is why I think the reality is kind of concerning, but I think Richard is going to share about how growth can be exponential rather than linear. It may not be, must be a set percentage every year. It could just suddenly jump up, which is a lot of times we see in the case of new technology adoption. So there's the curve, right, where, for example, moving from landlines to mobile phones, it took like over 40 years, right? But from mobile phones to smartphones, it took a lot lesser time than that. So that's an example of exponential adoption. So in that case, I guess I can say I am quite hopeful.
That's great to hear. You want to add to that?
Yeah,
Richard?
I think very similar. I mean, you have to remember the halfway point now. 2015 was when the Paris Agreement was signed, right? So it's always going to be a report card, a status of where we are. It was never meant to be, like Jasmine said, of being a linear. It's always going to be exponential. But you can see the growth in EV cars, you see the growth in solar panel, see the growth in technology of energy efficient equipment. It is getting there. And maybe this GST now of where we're looking at the trend now of where we are is a good kick to tell people that we've come a long way and we've still got a long way to go. But look how we've progressed so far, and can we continue that in future years?
And I think it's interesting is that as long as you have a coherent strategy, it's easy to, for everyone to actually fall in line, right? As long as the messaging is consistent. Yeah. And another thing that is interesting that a lot of even my clients ask me, right? Okay, so there is this target. How do we actually finance it?
Which is one of the key focus areas really in COP28 as well. So maybe just to give some context of what climate financing actually is, it's basically financing for climate mitigation and adaptation efforts to actually address some of these climate change issues. So nice segue to it. So maybe Richard, do you want to give some overview in terms of what this actually encompasses and the kind of like ongoing initiatives that we currently have in climate financing?
Yeah, I mean, there's the loss and damage. There's a loss and damage fund. There's also the 100 billion agreement that the developed countries will provide. So I think that's very important because the definition of who is paying for that, who is receiving that, who is in charge of that, has never really been agreed or clarified. There's still a lot of debating about that now. So as Malaysia, selfishly, we fall in this middle ground. We're not really a developed country, but we're also not eligible for the loss and damage fund as well. So it's how do we also help ourselves with the funding, and how do we actually clarify on who is receiving this, who is going to pay for it, and to try and help the adoption in the future.
Okay, that's great. Anything you want to add to that?
And I think interestingly, if you look at our local financial institution, we have the yellow bank and we have the red bank, right? They do have a lot of products that are trying to address transition financing. And the real challenge is that like any other financing project that we have, it doesn't have to be an energy transition project. How do we bring the bankers as well as the potential customers to the table, and how do we as professionals, it could be us, the accountants, it could be the consultants, and even the bankers, to actually advise the client that this is the best way to go forward. And I find that in a lot of my discussion with our clients is that they just do not know how to communicate what are their sustainability strategy to the bankers. And the bankers, were not able to actually dig out this kind of information that they needed to go back to their, credit risk committee to say that, they do have all these initiatives. So, and I think for us, and this is a real case, and even it's something that you are doing right now, right? How do we bring these few people, that one that need financing, one that are more than happy to provide financing, on the same table and agree out the term?
Yeah, maybe to add on to that, right? So in order for the terms, discussion, etc. to be effective, personally, I think structurally, right, there needs to be a new way to valuations, right? So how do you really measure if this, for example, transition project is going to make sense, right? So it's no longer about just the traditional financial metrics that banks look at, right? So there needs to be some kind of unified system of how every bank can look at a project, and also how a company can, produce its business case when it comes to new transition projects, because basically a lot of times you need to compare the metrics between projects, right? So without a clear, guidance in terms of how valuations can be for non-financial elements, right, it's going to be quite difficult to for all the banks to adopt in a big way. So that's what we are hearing from the ground as well. Like, so how do we value these projects? On a financial basis, it may not really make sense, but there are other elements to consider now.
I think there's a wider point of that actually needs to be alignment of the data points that people need to provide. There's a lot of data points that people need to provide for various different reasons, whether it's for banking, reporting, and we're not really comparing apples with apples. It's a lot of different data points from a lot of different positions. So to consolidate it and come up with a framework of here's the set data points that we need for banking, for Bank A, Bank B, Bank C, at least it provides a lot easier for clients to apply for funding because they know what data they need to provide.
Yep. Thanks for sharing your views. And I think that really touches on the multiple stakeholders that are actually involved in this entire ecosystem to make it work. We have the regulators, we have the data providers, right? You have the financial providers really working together to actually help operationalize some of these commitments and targets that have been set forth. All right. So yes, circling back to COP28, one of the things, again, another key focus area that they're touching on is really on mitigation. So I think that the COP presidency itself, they've already put some hopeful kind of success cases that they seek to be able to achieve from COP28, and that really includes some of the renewable targets. Hopefully, some of these targets we can come to some sort of consensus during COP28. So maybe opening up to Jasmine, any views on that, and really how can that actually further progress and help us, is it too ambitious, right? Are we able to achieve it, and so on and so forth?
Okay, personally, I believe that a target needs to be aspirational, right? So I believe ambitious it is, but I think in terms of maybe speaking from the Malaysian lens, right? I think currently we have about 25% of our energy mix is as renewable. So our target is to go up to, I think, 33 or 35% in a few years' time, actually. And there are a few challenges that we need to, or rather obstacles that at least, right, have been identified. So we kind of know what to do in that case. Firstly, Malaysia being a tropical country, I think there's this conception that, we have solar all the time, but basically the solar that is at its peak is only about 4 hours a day. So, there is a need to invest in battery storage, which is going to require high capex. So that has been recognized by the government, and I believe the policies are currently being shaped, right, to enable that kind of investment, including by foreign investors. So that is one. Another one is, okay, we talk about hydrogen quite a bit, which personally I do think hydrogen is going to be the future in, let's say, 5 to 6 years, probably not in the immediate term. But in order to produce clean hydrogen or green hydrogen, as we call it, we need to actually power the entire production of the hydrogen by renewable energy. So currently, renewable energy seems to be the key for a lot of the energy transition, even as we move along this certain number of years before we get to the net zero, right, in 2050. Okay, so as we are moving along energy transition, we're actually trying to adopt a lot of new things. For example, the very exciting sounding carbon capture, utilization and storage, right? But in order to do that, right, there needs to be a role to be played by both the government and the private sector. So a lot of times in huge infrastructure projects, we talk about risk allocation. So that's why we have our PPPs, etc. Right? So firstly, how do we provide the incentives to the private sector? I think that my colleagues kind of touched on already, in order for them to want to do it. And also, what are the risks that should be borne by the government? Because in terms of, for example, carbon capture storage, right, it's just too huge for a private operator to do alone and also create value from it. So definitely a support from the government is required. So a lot of time is also spent on how do we allocate the risk between private sector and public sector in order to make it work in a sustainable way. So I think Farhana. Yeah.
No, that's actually quite interesting as well, right? Because that means the way that the contracting will need to change. And we do have a lot of experience in dealing with PPP contract. We've done that for the power plant. We've done that in building Putrajaya itself is an example. But that means that the way that our tax initiative and our tax credits in the country will also need to change to cater for it. Is there anything available right now, Richard?
Yeah, so in the budget 2024, they amended some of the incentives as well. So there's green hydrogen available as an investment tax allowance. There's also some incentives for renewable energy, so for your solar and things like that. And there's actually an initiative where Petronas and the government are collaborating for the development of the carbon capture as well. So there's a few bits and pieces out there, but I think the problem is awareness, like you said, Farhana. Not everyone is aware that these things are available. And it's also making sure that scope of the incentive can cater for all the different types of projects. At the moment, the incentives are good, but they are very specific. Okay?
Yeah, so it needs to be wider.
Exactly, because technology is always progressing and updating itself, right? So we need to make sure that there's facility for people who are developing these new technologies to go and say to the government, say, hey, I'm doing this. Can you incentivize me or can you help me process and push this along?
And interestingly, I've been in cases where, because the incentive was not clear, it's helpful for you to just go directly to MOF and the IRB and say, this is what I'm doing, and can you give me this?
Exactly, yeah. So we do help a lot of clients with like pre-packaged incentives, where it's not as per the guidelines, but we go to them and say, here's our project plan, here's what we intend to do. Can you help support and facilitate us to develop this for the nation, but also for the wider, global commitments as well?
Okay, so we had a lot of conversation in terms of the kind of effort that is required to actually push the energy transition. But we are aware also that a lot of stakeholders will be impacted by the energy transition, especially some of those who are more vulnerable to the change. And this is really where the conversation on just transition comes to play. Maybe Jasmine, what are your views on that?
Yeah, so transition actually means different things for different countries or even different stakeholders within the same country. Because essentially, right, everybody might have a different starting point, right? So PwC did do a survey amongst our clients, right, to see how's everyone progressing. So we note that even the large organizations, most of them do not have a detailed roadmap towards net zero, although they might have a general idea, but there's no detailed roadmap with targets, etc. And also another group, I think, would be the SMEs, right? They actually play a vital role in Malaysia's economy, but basically they do lack the resources and the guidance as well, and the awareness, right, on what to do. As it is, they are just trying their best to move along and actually still be profitable, etc. And so they really do not have the means, right, for investment in, let's say, emissions tracking, etc. So currently what we are working how we're working with them is to, for example, in the construction industry, can the major players kind of take the lead and then cascade it down to the SMEs or even the associations to coordinate. So I think SMEs will be quite key as well.
You'll see this with the banks, the financial institution. They have JC3 where they actually have a working group that's trying to address the SMEs conundrum, right? How do we get them awareness? How do we get them to transition to a low carbon economy? And I suppose because their finance emission is the biggest in their statement right now.
Any views on the workforce? These individuals will also be impacted by the transition. A lot of upskilling is actually required to support that transition. Any views there?
Yeah, the interesting thing about workforce is that a lot of people will, with doomsday prediction, will say, the workforce will be taken over by the AI, or with sustainability, people are going to be losing their jobs, etc. But maybe I'm on the hopeful side. AI will get rid of all your boring kind of works and we can automate it. That's how I view it, right? And at the end of the day, you ended up doing a bit more meaningful work. And the same thing with sustainability. I do think that a certain skill sets are transferable. If you are an engineer, the knowledge of physics is still there. The ability to problem solving are still there. And I think as and when organizations go through a business transformation process, upskilling their team and upskilling their staff would be critical as well. And we always also tell them that don't forget also your suppliers that will also need to be upskilled. And another interesting thing is that the younger generations are a bit more open to sustainability kind of engagement, products and services. And it's interesting to see how these two cultures will merge in the next upcoming years, where we have the traditional values, traditional services, and then the up and coming, they are more open to sustainability related work, I suppose.
Okay. Well, to add on, I guess it's more of an example of what Farhana mentioned, right? For example, if you're an engineer or a worker even, right, in a coal-fired plant, it's not that difficult to be able to, work in a coal-firing plant, let's say, of biomass and gas as well, right? Because the skills are transferable. And the other part on the culture, and also, I guess, touch a little bit on the education pathways that the youth are taking, right? So in terms of culture, yes, people need to be ready to change, need to work together, need to accept new things, because for a lot of these people who are in the energy industry working with coal, it has been their way of life for like maybe decades, right? So there needs to be, this culture inculcated for them to be able to accept new technologies and, not just dismiss it, it's going to be too expensive, coal is still the best, etc. The other part on the education, I think looking at some data, we can see that almost nobody enrolls in nuclear-related studies now, or even in, as being a petroleum engineer, right? Because of how we always talk about how we're transitioning. Hence, I think some of the organizations, how they're working regarding that is that they're trying to, put up their own training centers, vocational schools, etc., to make sure they have a ready flow of talent when it comes to the needs going forward.
I think it's an interesting thing that you mentioned about career pathway, right? Because when you, in Malaysia, if you think about our plantation industry, one of the key challenges is that we don't have locals that would like to work under the hot sun and labouring away at the plantation. And one of the things that was discussed a lot is that how do we automate some of these activities so that we can build a more sustainable career pathway for our locals to actually work as part of the plantation, which is in a way address some sort of the upskilling as well as the social aspect, I suppose. But I don't think we really go in depth into the other aspect of plantation, which is actually the nature area of it. What do you guys think?
Okay, maybe I'll just share a bit from some of the previous experience and current, right? So I think a lot of people may realize that you'll be kind of disturbing, let's say, the elephants or even the tigers, right? When you actually have plantations. So in terms of what some current companies are trying to do is that, let's say you buy X hectares of land, right? You do not build to the hilt as you usually would with the, your plantations to maximize the value, right? Value creation. You actually leave like the corridors for the animals to be able to, kind of live in peace basically, and not disrupt their, their usual way of life too much. Because not only does it, is it better for the environment, for the biodiversity, also, essentially you can also earn carbon credits if you get it right, if you get it validated in terms of your methodology for conserving the area, for example. And it's also better for your branding, and which kind of just will snowball from there, right, throughout your entire, from your clients to your lenders to, even your employees. I think Farhana mentioned about how employees nowadays do care a lot more about sustainability. So I think that is one good sign. Another one is, for example, furniture makers, instead of sourcing timber, which is obviously very controversial, I think Richard's going to share about it more. People are looking at different types of plants, let's say eucalyptus, etc., which you not only can use the oil, but you can also use it to make furniture. So that one requires less planting time and should be more sustainable. But for that we need to do a detailed feasibility for you. But basically, people are looking at different alternatives to ensure sustainable operations.
Yeah, I think sustainable timber is a big thing in construction these days. Trying to reuse timber where you buy it from. Obviously, transporting it across the globe to your construction site is not ideal. So where do you actually get the timber from? Is it sustainably sourced? Those kind of things. But actually, touch on that point just now about the wider part. We see a lot of residential developments now actually being built on brownfield sites, actually encompassing those nature as part of the development itself. So since COVID, we've locked down, people like to enjoy the outdoor spaces, going for exercises. So we see a lot of developments now being built around lakes, incorporating water features and things like that. Even to the extent where they're actually building bridges and tunnels under the roads for animals to cross over in a more friendly or more environmental way. So it is happening, but so slowly.
All right, thanks everyone for sharing your views. And I think just to wrap up this episode, we've talked about a lot of things, surrounding COP28 and really what's leading up to it. Some of the key focus areas, the global stocktake being one of it. Really, how are countries going to respond to that at COP28? That would be something to look out for. Some of the key thematic areas that we talked about as well, renewable targets, some of the mitigation actions, nature-based solutions, and really how to help or progress energy transition in a very just and inclusive manner. That's something that we hope COP28 can progress further. But really, as mentioned, one of the key things or key next steps that needs to progress further, it's operationalization. Really, what kind of collaboration, what kind of partnerships are actually required across the different stakeholders involved to actually accelerate the progress further. And that's a wrap for this episode of ESG RoundUp. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode where we'll be covering post-COP28. Thank you, bye.